Let me just tell you a little about myself. I'm a writer and actor and filmmaker, and I met this man here, Marc Scott Zicree, the author of the Twilight Zone Companion.
Yeah, applaud, thank you. Thank you.
It was many years ago. I saw him on a TV special about the Twilight Zone, and I was like, oh wow, what a cool book. So I got the book. Then he went to I would say a book fair actually in Miami, actually was.
Yes.
And I went up to them and I said, you know, I really like what you wrote, except for about the episode, The Hunt. I liked that episode. He did not like the episode in his review, and I said, you know, I think you got that wrong. And he's like, you know, a lot of people tell me that.
Yeah.
Which I respected that. He was like able to...
It destroyed me.
So anyway...
But the thing that Earl Hamner did not tell me when I interviewed him repeatedly, he did not mention he had written that episode before the Twilight Zone for the Kate Smith Hour, and it was done as a skit, a dramatic live skit on that show, and it starred John Carradine and James Dean. And you can find that clip on YouTube now. So that's a really interesting little bit of trivia.
So that's pretty amazing. And I just want to introduce Marc a little bit. Before memes and Wikipedia and the internet, he wrote this book about the Twilight Zone, cataloging every single episode, who was in it, what they did, his review, and then beyond that, of course, the movies and the other versions of the show, the one in the 80s and then the early 2000s, and then recently I think you had a conversation with that. In this third edition, he has even more stuff.
Yeah, people kept telling me stories.
So anyway, but he's also a great filmmaker, very talented, and also a great supporter of many independent filmmakers, such as myself, both LA and abroad. So welcome, Marc. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Glad to be here.
And to his left is Morgan Brittany.
Yay!
So Morgan started acting at the age of 5 under the name Suzanne Cupito. She appeared in many programs in the 50s and 60s, beginning with the series Playhouse 90, and then doing 3 episodes of Twilight Zone, beginning with Nightmare as a Child, and then Valley of the Shadow, and of course Caesar and Me. As an adult, she changed her name to Morgan Brittany. She became a Ford model, appeared in commercials and print ads, and you've seen her in such movies as Yours, Mine, and Ours, Gable and Lombard, LBJ The Early Years, and then of course shows such as Married with Children, Murder, She Wrote, Sabrina Teenage Witch, but you may know her best as Catherine Wentworth in the classic soap opera Dallas. Okay, so let's get started. I want to start with you, Marc. Just want to ask you first, what gave the inspiration to write this book?
Yeah, it's, well, you know, the 3 shows that made me want to be a writer were the original Star Trek, the original Outer Limits, and the original Twilight Zone. And this is back in the day where everyone was watching everything because there were only 3 networks. That's everyone knew who all the actors were. They knew what the shows were. Even if you weren't watching The High Chaparral, you knew what the hell it was and that Barbara Stanwyck starred in it. But I knew I wanted to be a writer very early on, and I went to the Clarion Writers Workshop, which is the leading writing workshop in the country, science fiction writing workshop. And during that experience in August 1975, we heard that Rod Serling had died, and it just was, you know, I mean, it was just devastating. He was only 50. And I got the idea. I knew George Clayton Johnson, who was one of the great writers of Twilight Zone. He did Kick the Can and you know, Game of Pool and Nothing in the Dark and so forth. And I just had this idea about writing a book about the Twilight Zone because no one had done it. And if Rod had been alive, I would have not done the book because I would have assumed that if anyone was going to write a book on Twilight Zone, it would have been him. But since he was gone, and I was just graduating college in 1977, I decided, and I knew I wanted a career in TV. And I thought, well, the way you learn how to write and produce TV, because there were no classes in it back then, was I thought I'll research one of the greatest television shows ever made and learn how they did it. And so I started writing that book when I was, I think, 21. And it came out, was an instant bestseller. It's been in print ever since. And by the time I was 21 or 22, I was writing for television. So it served very well. And it was just amazing. Carol Serling, Rod's widow, gave me access to everything. I was literally crawling through Rod's attic and going through his scripts and files and all that. So it was amazing. And but yeah, so that's how that happened.
That's awesome. Wow.
That's amazing.
And for you, Morgan, I wanted to know like how you got involved in the show. I know you were very young at the time. Just if you talk about the audition process and how you ended up doing those episodes.
Yeah, it's kind of funny to look back on the old days of Hollywood because they're so different now than they used to be. Back then, and I think I did the Twilight Zone, my first one, in either 58 or 59, and I was really young. And being a kid actor back then, there was a very small group of child actors. I mean, you could probably list them all by name if you knew, because Billy Mumy and Angela Cartwright, Veronica Cartwright, myself, Patty Garrity, there were a lot of kids, and we were a small group, and just like Mark said, we would go from show to show to show. And I remember the audition was at MGM Studios, and it was just a regular audition where you go in and read a couple of lines for the director or whomever is in there, casting director and the director. And then you go home and wait for a phone call and, see if you got the job or you didn't. And that was pretty much the process back then. But working in the business, none of us, even throughout the years that I did Twilight Zone, which the last one was with Jackie Cooper, 63 or 64, something like that. None of us had any idea that it would, in 2023, we would be talking about Twilight Zone, and there would be thousands and millions of people around the world that knew every episode and knew every line and just cherished the writing and the direction. None of us had any clue. It was just pretty much a job that you went into, and you had some grins and laughs and did your work, and it was all done. The amazing thing about Twilight Zone, it was done on the back lot of MGM and on the sound stages of MGM. And they were all the same. They would just move a few sets around and make it look a little bit different. And then you'd go on the back lot or you'd go on location locally. And they'd use the same thing over and over. And if you really look at those episodes, you'll go, oh yeah, that was in that other show. There's Mickey Rooney, but that was in the other episode. I mean, it was, that's the way they did things back then. It wasn't big budget.
3 shooting days.
And it was, it was a great experience, but I had no idea it would turn into what it did. Because even to this day, people will ask me questions about,
well, here we are.
what I know, and what was it like, and the dummy that you worked with, was that the same dummy that was in the other episode, the dummy,
Yeah, exactly, yes.
And I have a lot of, I have so many memories of that, of doing that show. So that's the way it was in the beginning.
And also the other thing to point out that younger people wouldn't know is back then, you watched a show when it aired.
Yes.
And for instance, when the original, when Star Trek debuted, the original Star Trek, I was 10 years old, and I recorded it on reel-to-reel audio tape in case it never aired again.
Exactly.
Because there were no VCRs. There was no way to watch a show or a movie when you wanted to.
That's right.
And so now, all these years later, of course, if you wanted to watch her episode, Caesar and Me, or any of the other ones, Valley of the Shadow, or Nightmare as a Child, you could call them up immediately on television.
That's
you
right.
just go,
That's
say,
right.
this is what I want to watch. Oh, it's 99 cents to rent or whatever, and bang,
There it is.
Yeah. But one thing I will say about you is you were extremely distinctive and memorable. You looked like you do now, basically, except taller. But you were very memorable, very distinctive, and of course, in that final episode, you played a monster.
Oh yeah. What's really funny too is that I got a lot of my work as a kid because of my eyes. Even as a child, I mean, there were people, when I changed my name and I put the childhood career behind me after Yours, Mine, and Ours, I completely wanted to reinvent myself. But yet, people would say, I think I know you, And then finally, when I started doing movies of the week and things, people said, "Oh my gosh, you're the little girl that was in the Twilight Zone. I know you by your eyes."
Yeah.
And so a lot of the casting, when I went in, there was something about the persona that I had, which I guess was my eyes, which I was blessed with. I didn't do anything to get it. So, but you're right.
Yeah.
There were distinctive things, like Billy Mummy had a distinct quality about him that was very different from
He was
other
terrific,
kid
yeah.
actors.
Yeah.
And he was so intense and so good.
Yes.
But we all knew each other.
Yeah.
And everybody was different.
Yeah.
Because Angela Cartwright, even though she and I had the same basic coloring and look, totally different.
Different, yeah.
Totally different.
Well, I'm working with Bill now on a series.
Oh, are you?
So yeah,
Really?
and
Wow.
Veronica's going to be in another show that
Oh,
we're doing.
fabulous.
So it's very fun because these are, I mean, it's so wonderful to act with pros that who really have their you know, because well, we won't go down that road talking about some of the younger actors who don't know basic
Well,
stuff.
Veronica and I did The Birds.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yes.
The Birds. Yeah. Yes, you're right.
So
That's so great.
we got to work together in that, which was wow, is that stories. If you ever do a seminar on The Birds, there's a lot going on there.
Yeah, that'll be a fun talk, yeah.
Well, I was going to ask you about, Rod Serling in terms of him being on set. I mean, did he give you direction, but specifically, did he talk to you, or is he just kind of in the background, just kind of,
He was an enigma, basically. Very quiet man. I remember on one of the sets, I want to say it was Caesar and me. I'm pretty sure. But anyway, he had come in and he wanted to make sure everything on first day of shooting was okay. And so he got in a director's chair and he was sitting in one of those tall director's chairs and he was sitting under one of the arc lights. So he was in shadow.
Wow.
And you're not allowed to smoke on sound stages, remember? Well, he had his cigarette.
Of course.
And it was sitting, and you could see the
backlit.
smoke going
Wow.
up into the arc light. And I remember being on set, and I was a little bit nervous because I wanted him to, be impressed with what I was doing. But obviously, they had me back 3 times.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
it was, there was something that they liked. So,
Yes.
but he was very quiet. Never really had conversations.
Yeah, and it's interesting because he didn't intend to be the narrator of Twilight Zone initially. If you ever look at the original pilot, it was narrated by a guy named Westbrook von Voorhees, who did The March of Time, and then they tried to get Orson Welles, and he was too expensive. And so Rod finally said, well, how about me? And everyone fell out of their chairs laughing. But of course, he was the perfect
great.
choice.
Oh,
but
yeah.
that was never his intent. And so he was a writer first and sort of a host or a personality, an actor second. But interestingly enough, the first episode you did was written by Rod, and the second and third ones weren't.
Right,
So,
right,
so the second one was Charles Beaumont, and the third was, I guess, Adele T. Strassfield, who was William Frug's secretary. William Frug was,
is that right?
Yeah, William Frug
Really?
was the showrunner.
Yeah.
And that's the only episode with a woman byline.
Right.
Yeah, because it was a
interesting.
different world. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, Mark, I was going to throw my next question to you. Well, researching the show, what surprised you the most, and then, what was what surprised you the most, actually?
It was amazing. I interviewed over 100 people, and the fact that I was able to convince Carol Serling, Rod's widow, to let me do the book when I had never even written so much as a newspaper article. I was an art major. I'd sold one short story, but I interviewed 30 people before I went to Carol, and so I really knew my subject, and I really knew I could pull this thing off. And she just believed me and gave me full access to everything. And there were secrets I found that no one had ever written about. For instance, all of the Twilight Zone episodes credited to Charles Beaumont. He was one of the great writers, along with Serling and Matheson and George Clayton Johnson and Earl Hamner. For the last season and a half, all of the episodes credited to him were ghost-written by other people because he was starting to show the first signs of pre-senile dementia that ultimately killed him 4 years later. And so he could sell stories still, but he couldn't write them. And so, for instance, Living Doll, which is the Talkie Tina episode, that was actually plotted by Matheson and his friend Jerry Soule, but Jerry Soule wrote it in its entirety. And so no one had ever talked about that, no one had ever revealed it, and finally they revealed that to me. And also, when I was up in Rod's attic, I found a box that was unmarked, I opened it up, and it was filled with unproduced Twilight Zone scripts by Serling and by Charles Beaumont and Richard Matheson, and 2 by Ray Bradbury. And one of them had a cover note written by Ray that said, this is the first one, I'm sure will be many, I look forward to a good, wonderful collaboration. And three of Bradbury's proteges were the core writers, Matheson, Beaumont, and George Clayton Johnson, but Ray only was credited with 1 episode. And I'd heard that he and Rod had had a falling out, but neither of them ever talked about it publicly. And so when I was researching the book in my early 20s, I wrote to Ray and I said, will you let me interview? And he said, no, my work stands for itself and blah, blah, blah. So decades later, Ray came across something I'd done and really loved it, and he called me and he invited me to the house, and I started going like once a month to hang out with Ray Bradbury and talk about life and career and everything. And I didn't tell him I'd written the Twilight Zone Companion because I knew it was a sore point. And finally, and I did this for over a decade, finally we were good enough friends that I admitted that I'd written that book, and I said, okay, can you tell me what happened between you and Serling? And he did. And I have a YouTube channel called Mr. Sci-Fi where I said, okay, I'm going to tell the story that Ray told me. It takes 30 minutes to tell it, so I won't tell it here. But if you go on Mr. Sci-Fi on YouTube, you can just type in Bradbury and it'll come right up, and you can listen to it. But it was amazing how Rod was influenced by Bradbury, and they just, there came that fracture point, and it was never really healed.
But he did do 1 episode, right? The Icing the Body Electric,
yes,
right?
but it was a very problematical episode. They shot it, and then months later had to reshoot it with different
actors.
Different actors, and so it was very problematical. But that and Veronica Cartwright in it,
Right.
But it was amazing. I mean, the kid actors who were the staples, the ones you saw over and again, were all so solid. I mean, it was great.
Well, I did a Twilight Zone convention a while back, and Mary Badham was there.
Oh, wow.
And Mary Badham, I was just amazing in To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yes, she
and
played
then for
Scout.
her, I mean, just incredible. And we had the best conversations about Twilight Zone, because she said the same thing that I did, like how did this come together so magically, this show?
Yeah.
I don't know what the intervention was, but the writing, the producing, the directing, the casting,
the music, Bernard Herrmann, Jerry Goldsmith.
The music, everything
phenomenal
about it. And it was a lot of it too. If you look back, like one of my favorite episodes is The Obsolete Man.
Yes,
Oh,
Burgess Meredith.
Burgess Meredith.
and
It's one of my favorites. And I watch that over and over, and I am just amazed at back then how prescient it was that this could be our life.
Yes.
And some of the other shows were so, it's like somebody could see.
I know. He was amazing.
It's just so bizarre, but it came together
That's right.
so incredibly well, where many other TV shows, they come and they go, but they don't have this power. I mean, you think about, what is it, Memorial Day or 4th of July, and it's a marathon every year.
Yes.
I mean, over and over and over, and people can just watch them again and again and again.
Yes.
It's fabulous, and every time I watch them, I see different things. I see things I missed before.
It's
I
wonderful.
see, nuances. I had the pleasure. I did a TV series for Aaron Spelling that was very short-lived called Glitter, and Burgess Meredith worked with us, and I was such a fan.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just saying, oh my gosh, every single episode of Twilight Zone that he did was just in the top 10 probably.
He was brilliant.
Right?
Yeah. And I got to interview him when I researched the book.
Oh,
and
you're so
I went to the
fortunate.
Malibu colony and we just sat on the beach.
Oh my gosh, how
talking.
wonderful.
It was great. And but again, it's like the reason I think the show came together so brilliantly was Rod Serling was the top writer in television.
Right.
And yet, now which Playhouse 90 did you do?
It was called Shape of the River, and it was I believe, I'm trying to remember, was it French Tone or somebody like that? It was like a Mark Twain
kind of
period piece.
Yeah.
But that was one of the very first things I ever did.
Yeah, wow.
But those,
90
were just
minutes
amazing too, live.
Drama.
Yeah.
And because Rod made his mark with Playhouse 90 with Requiem for Heavyweight and The Velvet Alley and so forth.
Yes.
But the thing was, he was the top paid and most famous writer working in television. Chayefsky had left, a lot of the others had bailed, because the original expectation in television has been that this would be a Broadway stage, but for the entire country, live. It would be, and so Rod wanted to be the Arthur Miller of television. That was his ambition. But more and more he was being censored. And when he wanted to write about race, when he wanted to write about social issues, politics, he couldn't even say Democrat or Republican in a show he wrote about Congress. You know, and so he felt very, very, very constrained. And then he finally had an idea. He had a pilot deal with CBS, and he had an idea of if he wrote science fiction, he could slide what he wanted to say by the censors, because it would be about Martians or you know, whatever. And it worked. And but he never really wanted to be a science fiction writer. That he was a science fiction fan, but that was out of necessity. That was his life hatch. And so, but because he was so powerful and so famous at that point. He had won tons of Emmys, and he had power. He was the first real showrunner in the modern sense. Prior to Rod, producers ran the show, and writers were subordinate to them. The producer had the final say. Right. Rod was the first writer, creator in drama that was the guy at the top of the food chain. And so when he brought Matheson and Beaumont and all those guys aboard, he said, listen, write your script, and we're not going to screw with it. And Beaumont didn't believe him. Beaumont had written for Wanted, Dead or Alive, some of the other shows. And he said, but okay, I'll try. And he was astonished that they shot the draft the way he wrote it.
You want to know something?
Sure, yeah.
The scripts that I found?
Yeah.
White pages.
Wow, that's amazing. Now, for those who don't know what that means, in TV, each time there's a new draft, a production draft, it's a different color. So the first draft is the white draft, and so they never shoot that version. And but it's true. And so they trusted their writers, and Rod protected the writers. And because the scripts were so great, they could get great directors, they could get great actors. A lot of actors who normally wouldn't do television, Rod could get them. And so, I mean, you know, Jackie Cooper, I mean, he had been a kid star.
Mickey Rooney.
Yeah, Mickey Rooney.
And I feel like, and I wanted to ask you about like the residents. I feel, and I want to see what both of you feel, is that one of the reasons why this particular show connects to people is, I think, because it does go beyond being just a scary show. It's not just a twist. It's also connecting to something very relatable that I feel like we all feel.
Well, it's what Morgan was saying. The most TV shows, if you ask what they're about, the answer is they're about an hour. And you know, and that's it. Right, yeah. But Rod had a lot to say, and he had a great compassion and a great empathy and a great, he had a great sympathy for the little guy, you know, and you know, and that humanity, that enormous soul of his, and the incredible articulateness, it just shines through. And he set that bar so high that the other writers rose to it, you know, and. You know, they were all different, one from the other, but my gosh, just the talent pool was incredible. Yeah,
and you have to empathize with the characters.
Yes.
And you did. I mean, even in Caesar and Me, he did a bad thing, but you felt for him.
Yeah.
And which gave me ammunition as being the villainess in it. To be, you know, to go after it even more. And the director, I remember when we sat down and we discussed the episode and how he wanted me to play it. And Jackie was kind of like this, I mean, he was the most amazing guy, because he'd come in and he'd be laughing and having this great time and go on set. And then this persona just changed. Yes. And he'd kind of slump his shoulders a little bit, and he'd be dejected, and it would be this whole, and it was a metamorphosis that I couldn't believe. Yeah. But yet, that's what people grabbed onto in a lot of those episodes. Yes. Like with Burgess Meredith, when his glasses fell, you know? Yeah. I mean, it's like, you feel it. Yeah. And so many times today in shows, you just don't feel it. No. Well, but also another thing I think relates to this is that generation of writers and directors and even actors, most of them had been through World War II as soldiers. Yes, exactly. Right? Rod was a paratrooper. He jumped out of airplanes into jungles filled with men trying to kill him. Yep. And that I refer to that generation that came back from that war as young old men, because they weren't the same as teenagers would be now, or people in their early 20s, and they had life experience. They had seen life and death, and they lived on the edge, and they knew what it was to face their own mortality. And so there's a depth of
understanding of the real world
Right.
that shines
Right.
through that work.
Right.
Whereas a lot of the TV you have now, and I don't mean to badmouth the young generation of writers, but most of them are writing things derived from other movies and TV shows.
Yes.
And they haven't
Yes.
taken the time and trouble to go out and live.
Yeah,
And you
it's
know,
true.
it's just a carbon, like a copy of a copy of a copy.
Which is
Right.
why this holds up,
Yeah.
right?
Yes,
Absolutely.
yes, yes,
That's
yes.
why it holds up.
Yeah, well, great is great.
That's true.
So, yeah.
Very true.
Well,
Yeah.
on that token, I wanted to ask you, this is,
Sure.
ultimate fan question. What are your favorite episodes? Like, what connects you the most? Like, this is like
Me?
my number. Yes. For Mark, I'll start with you.
Yeah. Walking Distance would have to be my favorite. Kick the
Yeah.
Can. I love those. I was recently a guest of honor at the Rod Serling Fest in Binghamton, which was Rod's hometown in New York, and I saw all of the places that inspired
Oh, wow.
Walking Distance. I saw the bandstand. I saw the carousel, which they've restored with images of the Twilight Zone on it, and I saw Rod's home, his boyhood home, which is still there and still looks exactly as it did when he was a kid. Amazing. If you have 200 grand, you can probably buy that house, by the way. The prices are very, very low in upstate New York. But, you know, it's like, that was the most personal and autobiographical of all the episodes he wrote for Twilight Zone. And the score by Bernard Herrmann is astonishing, and Gig Young is terrific in it. So,
Yeah.
so that's the one, that's one I would speak of. But do you have two?
I have so many, but
Yeah.
The Obsolete Man, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love Cliff Robertson in The Dummy.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
I mean, what a performance. And you think about it, what was it shot in 3 or 4
3
days?
days,
Or
3
3
days, yeah,
days?
yeah,
And this
amazing.
guy had to come in and do this intense, and I'm talking intense with no other actor
Right,
around,
yeah.
right? And so that one impressed me so much. Let's see, what else? Oh, the one Donna Douglas did.
Yes.
Where
The Eye of the Beholder.
The Eye of the Beholder,
Yeah.
that's it. That one really, I mean, of course it's scary, and of course but it also
great.
is a deep meaning.
It's about inclusion. And this is years
Exactly.
before disability
and that's
rights or any of
how
that.
what he did that Serling was so brilliant with, is he made it
Right.
sci-fi, but he got his message.
Yes.
Right.
And when I interviewed Doug Hayes, who directed that episode, I found out 2 great secrets that I hadn't known before. One was, Doug knew that at the end of the episode, the bandages, supposedly it's a hideously ugly girl, and
Right.
they take off the bandages,
Right.
and she's beautiful at the end. And he said, well, and he thought to himself, well, rather than getting a beauty who's a hell of an actress, I'll get a beauty for the end part and have a different actress under the bandages. So he got Maxine Stewart, who was
Exactly.
great with her voice and with her hands.
Yes,
And
yes.
but Doug told me another thing, and this is one of the reasons why I wrote the updated version, because he didn't tell me this story until after the book had come out, which was he was shooting that episode, and he realized that they were going to run short. And Rod was out of town, and this is before cell phones. He couldn't be reached. So Doug himself was a writer, so he wrote an extra scene in that episode in Rod's style. And if you ever watch that episode, there's a scene in a break room where the doctor and the nurse are smoking a cigarette, and he says, I've looked under the bandages, it's a human face. Doug wrote that scene. And so then when Rod came back, they screened the episode for Rod, and Doug was in the back of the theater just sweating bullets. And at the end of the episode, Rod turned to him and said, nice scene.
That's great.
Yeah,
Yeah,
wonderful.
The other one that just was always just freaked me out was the one where the car, after the car that would,
Yes.
the actor's name was
Edward Arnold?
No, Edward, I can't remember.
Yeah.
Anyway.
It's been a while.
It's been a while.
Yeah.
But when the car goes down
It's
the
called New
road,
Drive.
and I'm just
Yeah.
thinking, oh, this is crazy. And then
Yeah.
they came out, and Stephen King
Yes,
did
yes.
Christine
Because
later.
everyone saw those same episodes.
You know?
You know?
I mean, it's just crazy, but I
Yeah.
do. Those,
It's super
but
fun.
There's so many.
Yeah.
I mean, I could go through your book
I know.
and probably go, oh, yes.
Yeah. But there are like these memory bursts, you know, they're so, and that's why you can see them over and over again, because they're just so wonderful. It's like you care about those people, as you said, and you know, it's like, and the same with The Inheritors, you know, when you did the Outer Limits episode, where these guys gathering these children, you don't know if
Right,
he's
right.
nefarious, there's this strange thing in his head that's
Yep,
guiding him,
yep.
and these other people, and ultimately you learn that he's taking these disabled children to a planet where they'll be whole. And it's such a compassionate ending, and I mean, you know, you tear up when you watch that
Oh,
episode.
yeah,
It's so
that-
great.
That was one I really, really was proud of
Yeah.
doing.
Oh, yeah.
I really was,
should
because
be.
I thought, wow, that was written so well and acted so well. I probably won't do another one. And what did I do? I went on to Lassie next week.
Yeah, that's how it works. That's how it works.
Either that or My Three Sons.
Yes.
Or,
But again, it was like, but the fun part is that these were shot on 35 millimeter. They are only 3 networks, so a typical audience, Twilight Zone was getting 30 to 40 million viewers a week.
Yeah, I know.
Now, if a show gets us 3 million, it's lucky.
Yeah.
Right.
Many shows on Netflix are getting maybe 300,000 viewers total, for a series.
And you remember, they did what? How many episodes a season? 30?
Yeah.
At least 26, if not more.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I was going to say, first of all, it was Edward Andrews. Apparently,
Yes.
that was
Edward Andrews.
Yeah, look that up.
Yes.
Thanks to the book. But I wanted to open up to questions from the audience, please. Okay, right here. Yes.
Mark, love your book.
Thanks.
I get it all the time. Just wondering if you've ever thought about doing a follow-up, and if so, what would it be?
It would be this. This has 100 more pages, 500 new photographs, links to audio and video. And it goes into a little bit of the later series, the later incarnations of Twilight Zone, one of which I wrote for, the one in the 80s or early 90s. But yeah, I mean, and I also produced the Blu-ray set, so I did 52 episode commentaries with various creative personnel. We'll have to sit down and do an audio commentary with you.
Yeah, fun.
It's but yeah, because it's the Twilight Zone is just, the funny thing was, when I wrote the book, about 20 years went by, and I didn't tend to watch the episodes or read my own book, and the manuscript was 1,000 pages. It was typed. But and I had to retype it. But the PBS was doing a documentary on Serling, and they asked me to come. They were going to shoot it in black and white film, and they were going to interview me for about 2 hours. And so I thought, I brought the book with me, just in case I couldn't remember things like Edward Andrews. And they put a camera in front of me, and I talked for 2 hours and never once cracked open the book. And I realized how hardwired that stuff was in my head. And but I'm so glad that I wrote the book when so many of the creative personnel were around. I mean, Doug and all those people. I mean, George Clayton Johnson and Matheson. I mean, brilliant men and women. And so it's just so you can catch up with the Blu-ray set or with this. And but I sort of kind of. I actually did a Kickstarter campaign where I was going to do the remaining 100 episodes I haven't done commentaries on with the creative personnel and with those who've been inspired by Twilight Zone, which is pretty much every writer in drama. And because I did a few commentaries on Twilight Zone episodes with people like Neil Gaiman and Matt Weiner, who created Mad Men, and they're all, Rod is their idol, And but so I didn't finish that Kickstarter campaign just because things got too busy on the show I'm writing and directing and producing now. But eventually I'll probably do that 100 extra episodes. Just
You'll get to it.
yeah, when I have the time. So.
Okay. Yes.
I guess this question for both of you, it might be more for Morgan, but
Please.
some directors are known to be actor directors, directors who lead you through your process. I'm just curious, since you got to do several episodes, how actor-friendly were the Twilight Zone sets? Were you expected to come in, you've done your work, and then you line up and go, or is it reverse, or what do you experience?
On the first two, on Nightmare as a Child, I only worked the one day, so I didn't have much of an interaction with a lot of the people on that show. And Valley of the Shadow, I don't even remember who the director was on that one, but I must tell you, Robert Day, who did Caesar and Me, was phenomenal. Because I had never played a villain. I had never played a mean girl before, ever. And it was, I didn't know how far to go. I didn't know how far he wanted me to go. If it was, I had a great, we sat down at that kitchen table. Remember where the kitchen table where I talked to my aunt and then go to the phone and whatever. We sat down there in the morning and he told me step by step, I will tell you if you're going too far. But he said, I must tell you, a little bit less is more. On the evilness will come out of you in your dialogue. And he said, you don't have to go overboard with it. And when I'm doing this scene, I couldn't help. you think you see that show, and you know the dummy is there. And the dummy is being manipulated by a guy in the back, okay? And then there's a voice guy who's offset, and he would just joke around and do all kind, try to make me laugh all the time. And then when I had to do the cigar into the face of the dummy, it was like, I mean, the stuff that came out of his mouth, it was like, okay, all right. But it was really peculiar. If anybody had been on that set and watched what happened that day, you know, it was pretty unusual. But I gotta tell you, Robert Day, he really didn't have to do too much with Jackie, because Jackie he had his own take on that character, and he nailed it. But that was very new for me, because I had not done a bad girl before. I got used to it though, didn't I? Because in Dallas, I used a lot of that.
Yeah, and but it's great, and you're great in that episode. It's I mean, the thing that's so fascinating about that character is her intelligence, the fact that she's very, very sharp.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, I remember watching that and wondering what that little girl would grow up to be. You know, it's like she's definitely gonna have the advantage over everyone else, and particularly with that dummy.
Yeah.
But that's really fun. But in TV, because it goes so quickly, some directors are just technicians, and they're just trying to make their day, and they're not going to give you help as an actor. And then others are actors, directors, and they'll really...
I had another one that was great, too. I did an episode of Gunsmoke, and it was Bob Sargent who directed me on that, and he taught me how to be real, more real than ever in television. And I mean, back then, the cameras were static. You know, you did a main shot, you did a master, and then you moved in for close-ups.
Yeah.
There were no steady cam. There was no following you around on anything. And so you were kind of set in a position, and you really couldn't move around if you really felt like it. And Bob said, "Don't worry about it. I want you to do whatever a little girl would do. Just do whatever a little girl would do." And he says, if that means you're laying on the horse and you want to pet its hair or pull its hair or do whatever it is you want to do, just do what you feel.
Yes.
And it ended up being one of the things that I took with me into the future career and used it in a lot of things. I learned so much as a kid actor, I've got to tell you. From never taking an acting class, but having the best acting class with all these great people that I ended up working with. I mean, you can't ask for anything more. All of us kid actors did that, because very few of them were trained.
Yes.
I mean, really, we were all just pretty much raw talent and real.
Yeah.
And that was the early days of TV.
Well, Bill Mumy told me a great story. He did a Hitchcock show that Hitchcock directed, and for some reason Bill was very fidgety that day, and so Hitchcock came right up to him, and he's huge,
yes, he
huge,
is,
fat guy, and he came up like this close to Bill, who was like a little kid, and he said, "If you don't stay on your mark, I will get nails, and I will nail your feet to the floor, and the blood will flow like milk." So like, oh, Jesus.
Yeah, I have a story like that from The Birds.
Yeah, really,
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
So,
pretty crazy.
yeah. Questions?
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Yes, you.
Do we have more?
Sure, you bet.
If you, in that box that you found in
Rod's attic. Yeah.
was there any particular story that you saw or anything glimpse that you would like to tell us about?
Yeah, sure. And by the way, thanks for everyone turning out. I mean, it's. I thought it would just be me and crickets. So thank you. And that's of course a testament to the wonderful work that Morgan did and so many other great people on that show. Yes, it was really like finding treasure, buried treasure. The two scripts by Bradbury were amazing, particularly one called A Miracle of Rare Device that was based on a short story he'd written about two homeless guys or just hobos who find a mirage that will manifest itself as any city that you've ever wanted to visit but never got to visit. And you can actually wander around within the mirage and one guy summons up Xanadu. And then there's this guy who always, whatever they're trying to do, they're almost like Lenny and the other character of Mice and Men, but there's always one guy who follows them, throughout their lives, and he spoils everything and he ruins this mirage for them. And it's a wonderful script and very doable, very producible, but that actually had a production number on it. They were going to shoot it. I have no idea why they pulled the plug. It might have been because there was a change in producers. It's possible, but I don't know. And then there was a great script by Matheson called The Doll, which wasn't Living Doll, which Beaumont wrote, or Jerry Soule wrote, but that was ultimately done decades later on Amazing Stories, and it won an Emmy. But those were some of the scripts. There was one by Beaumont called Gentlemen Be Seated, which took place in a future where humor was outlawed, and so there was a humor underground that would tell jokes and slip whoopee cushions under people, and so it was a wonderful to read through those scripts. Amazing.
Wow. Anybody else? Yes, in the back.
Hmm?
Gosh, favorites. I had, I did a Western with Chuck Connors, who was the rifleman.
Yes.
And we got along great, and I loved working with him. He was amazing. Some of the actors and actresses, when kids came on set, they really didn't have much time for you.
Yeah.
And then there were other actors who really treated you like family. Andy Griffith's show was one where I played Opie's girlfriend on that. And anyway, Andy was so welcoming and open, and they made me feel right at home because you think about it, you're entering their life on their stage that they do every single day and every single week, and you're the new person that comes in. And a lot of people just assume, oh yeah, you're only going to be here for a week, but others make you feel really, really great. Scared of? Lucille Ball.
Wow.
Lucy on Yours, Mine, and Ours. I remember doing the screen test for Yours, Mine, and Ours. And at Paramount Studios, there's a room called the Fishbowl. Do you know where the Fishbowl is? Okay. It's where it's like there's like they have in the police stations where they can see you, but you can't see them.
Oh, wow.
And you do your scenes and everything. So I had to go in there and do my audition scene for Yours, Mine, and Ours. And I had no idea who was watching me. And when I was finished, the door opened, and I see this person come out in like a leather jacket and a taxi driver's hat and hands in her pockets, and she looks up at me, and it's Lucy, right? And I'm 15 or 16 years old, and I'm thinking, Lucy from I Love Lucy, right? Oh no. This deep voice comes out, and she goes, "That was really, really good." And I said, "Thank you. That's great." And then when I got on set, I was hired and I got on set, no nonsense. 18 kids. And man, if you didn't toe the line, if you were 4 and you didn't toe the line, she basically got in your face and said, "You can be fired." A 4-year-old. So all of us knew it was like, okay. Lucy, but yet, I've got to say, I learned more from her about knowing technique and also knowing technical things about lighting, about makeup, about angles.
Yes.
She knew everything. In fact, the director, Mel Shavelson, just kind of stood back whenever Lucy was in the scene and didn't bother. And Henry Fonda very rarely said anything, just kind of went along with everything. Lucy would come on set and she'd say, "Move that light. That's my light. It's not far enough over." And then she'd say, "Don't come in too close. You know how far to come in. Don't come in any closer." And everybody's like, okay.
Well, she
yeah,
ran a studio.
was-
She and Desi ran a studio. They were the founders of Desilu. There wouldn't be
But
Star Trek or Mission
that's
Impossible
right.
without her.
That's right.
Yeah.
But Lucy, you know, you see her on all these shows and everything, but she was tough. She was tough, but what a pro. I mean, what a pro. You don't see that much anymore. She and Gene Kelly, who I danced with.
Wow.
Scared to death.
I can only imagine.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I did think that's all the time we have, but I want to say before you guys go, I did have a prize for you to win. This is a 3rd edition of the Twilight Zone Companion. My son in the back is excited about this. This is the 3rd edition of the Twilight Zone Companion, signed by both Mr. Marc Zicree and Ms. Morgan Brittany. To get the book, you have to answer this trivia question. And the first person to raise their hand, maybe help me if I find out which one is the first person. Which episode was the first one to feature both the familiar Marius Constant theme and the first to feature Rod Serling on camera introducing the episode? Oh, this guy right here.
It was the episode where the woman kept saying that she keeps having the same drink over and over again, and then it's the airport.
No, that's not the one. Anyone else?
You know?
Yeah.
One for the angels?
No. Anybody else? I have an alternate question, just in case. All right.
It's a hard
You might
one.
want to give the answer to that.
Yes, I will give the answer though. That was King 9 Will Not Return.
The
That
first
was one.
episode of season 2.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. This one. There's actually 2 answers for this, so I guess the first person who raised their hand will. Which actor starred in the most episodes? Which actor starred in the most episodes? They have their hand up right back there. Yeah. Yes, that's one of them. Okay. And Bruce Meredith. Yeah. All right. So that's for you.
Okay, cool.
All right. Well, guys, thank you so much for coming. Thanks to my guest, Marc Zicree, Morgan Brittany. Thank you guys so much.